I'm so glad you're here. If you're listening right now, take a breath with me. And if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story from. I want to know how far this one travels. Because this story didn't start with rage. It started with silence. The kind of silence that creeps into your house and refuses to leave. It fills the corners, settles into the furniture, sits beside you at breakfast. That's what my home had become. A museum of unspoken words. My name's Elena, and until a few months ago, I thought I was living a pretty ordinary life. Married for 7 years to Daniel, a man I used to describe as calm, patient, predictable, the kind of person who always kept his promises. He worked in marketing, traveled a lot, always had meetings that ran late. And me. I taught piano from home, tended to the plants, tried to build a life that felt soft and safe. For the longest time, I thought we had it. But safety can be a kind of blindness. That day, I remember waking up to the sound of rain. The sky was the color of wet concrete, and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Daniel had already left for work, or at least, that's what I assumed. He'd kissed my forehead earlier, whispered that he'd be home late again. I told him to drive safe. He smiled, the kind of small, distracted smile people give when they're already halfway out the door. I spent the morning with my students, listening to hesitant fingers stumble over Chopin. I smiled, corrected, encouraged. But behind my voice, something was humming. A quiet unease I couldn't name. When the last student left, I sat by the window with my tea. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and through the blur of water on glass, I saw Daniel's car parked halfway down the street. That struck me as odd. He'd said he had an early meeting. Why would his car still be here? I almost brushed it off. Almost. But curiosity, or maybe intuition, has a strange persistence. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So I grabbed my umbrella and stepped out. The cold air bit at my cheeks as I approached the car. Our car. The one we'd bought together the year we moved into this house. Silver paint. Small dent on the side mirror from a careless grocery store parking lot. Familiar, ordinary, until it wasn't. I remember hesitating before opening the door. I told myself I just wanted to grab the umbrella Daniel always forgot to take. But the truth is, I was looking for something I couldn't describe. Proof, maybe. Or reassurance. Both live in the same drawer until you open it. The glove compartment stuck for a second before it gave way. And there it was. A small, half-used tube of personal lubricant. Nothing else, no receipt, no explanation, just that. Sitting there like a tiny bomb in the middle of my day. For a moment, I just stared at it. I blinked, waiting for my mind to offer a reasonable story. Maybe it was left from months ago. Maybe it wasn't even his. Maybe. But each maybe felt thinner than the last. My heartbeat picked up, loud enough that I could hear it echo in my ears. I closed the compartment, locked the car, and stood there under the soft drizzle, trying to breathe. The street looked the same, neighbors' windows fogged from the weather, the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance, but everything inside me had shifted. When I went back inside, the house felt foreign. The photos on the wall, us smiling on the beach, us cutting a cake, looked like portraits of strangers. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my mug with my finger. The clock on the wall ticked with a cruel patience. Every sound was too loud, too deliberate. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself to wait until he came home and explain it. But I already knew I wouldn't. Not yet. Because I didn't want explanations. I wanted truth. And truth rarely comes when you demand it. It comes when you watch. That's when the idea started to form. Quiet, careful, dangerous in its simplicity. I didn't want to confront him. I wanted him to reveal himself. To trip over the weight of his own lie. The rest of the afternoon crawled. I tried to read, to play piano, to do anything that would drown out the sound of my thoughts. But every note I touched felt hollow. My hands trembled over the keys like they no longer belonged to me. Around 6, the sky turned dark. Daniel texted, "Dinner might run late again. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed, "Okay. Be safe." Then deleted it. Typed again. "Sure." Deleted that too. In the end, I didn't reply at all. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the condensation slide down the bottle. I wasn't angry yet. Just suspended. Like the moment before thunder. That's when I noticed the box of tools Daniel kept by the laundry room, old screws, superglue, small repair stuff. It's strange what the mind connects when it's hurt. One glance, one thought, and a seed of revenge plants itself almost on its own. But revenge wasn't the goal. Not really. I wanted clarity. A mirror, not a weapon. Still, I looked at that box a long time. And by the time the wine was gone, an idea, absurd, childish, yet irresistible, had taken root. I didn't know then how far it would go. How much it would change everything that came after. But I knew this. I couldn't keep living inside a question. I needed an answer, even if it broke me. And that night, as I cleaned the kitchen and turned off the lights, I made a quiet promise to myself. Tomorrow, I would stop pretending not to see. The next morning began like any other. That's the cruel thing about betrayal, it hides best inside routine. The sunlight looked innocent when it came through the curtains. The smell of toast, the hum of the coffee machine, the sound of a car starting somewhere down the street, all the little ordinary notes that make up a life. Except now, every sound felt staged. Like someone had pressed play on a recording of my own marriage. I stood at the sink washing dishes we hadn't really used, and my mind kept circling the same image, that small tube in the glove compartment. It sat there in my head like a flashing light, impossible to ignore. When Daniel finally walked into the kitchen, I swear my heart forgot how to beat. He looked normal. Maybe too normal. "Morning," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His lips were warm, familiar. But his scent, that cologne he only wore for work dinners, felt out of place at 7:30 a.m. "Morning," I murmured back, keeping my voice steady. He poured his coffee, asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. We talked about nothing, the weather, the neighbor's dog, a bill that came in the mail. Every word felt rehearsed. And as he spoke, I watched him with the kind of attention you only learn when you stop trusting. Every pause, every blink, every time his hand twitched toward his phone. I remember thinking, he doesn't know that I know. And there was power in that. Quiet, trembling power. When he left for work, I waited by the window until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went outside again, barefoot on the cold pavement, and looked at the driveway as if it could tell me something. It didn't. But I felt the weight of my decision settling in. I spent the rest of the day moving through the house like a ghost. I folded laundry, watered the plants, practiced a sonata I'd played 100 times before. But my mind kept returning to that moment of discovery, to the certainty that something sacred had shifted. By afternoon, I had convinced myself I needed proof. Not for anyone else, just for me. If I confronted him, I wanted to be sure. So I checked things I'd never checked before. His desk drawers. The jacket pockets he left hanging on the chair. The second phone charger he kept in the study for emergencies. Nothing screamed infidelity, but everything whispered possibility. I found a receipt folded inside his notebook, a restaurant downtown, dated 3 nights ago. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine. The signature was his. My stomach twisted. 3 nights ago, he'd told me he was at a client dinner. Maybe that part was true. Maybe. I sat on the edge of the bed, receipt in hand, and whispered to the empty room, "Why are you doing this, Daniel?" The house didn't answer. That evening he texted again. "Working late. Don't wait up." The same phrase, the same pattern. I almost laughed at how predictable it had become. But instead of drowning in suspicion, I felt strangely calm. Because this time, I had a plan. I went to the garage, opened the toolbox he kept for household repairs. It smelled of metal and oil, the scent of things that hold other things together. Among the clutter sat a small bottle of industrial glue. The same one he'd used months ago to fix a broken chair leg. My hand hovered over it. It's funny, the moment right before you cross a line. Your brain screams logic, don't do it, "This is childish, you're better than this." But your heart, bruised and silent for too long, whispers something else entirely. Let him feel it. I picked up the glue. Then I put it down again. Then picked it up once more. The rhythm of indecision. I didn't want to hurt him, not really. I just wanted the truth to trip out into the open. To make him stumble over his own deceit. I sat at the table for a long time that night, the bottle beside me. The clock ticked like a metronome for my thoughts. By the time Daniel came home, it was past 11. He smelled of wine and the faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed. He smiled when he saw me awake. "You're still up?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep," I said, watching him remove his jacket. He paused for a heartbeat, maybe guilt, maybe fatigue, then kissed the top of my head and disappeared into the shower. I sat there listening to the water run, every drop a question. I thought about the glue, the car, the box of lies that was slowly building between us. And I realized something. The silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was protecting him. When he came back, I was pretending to read. He looked at me for a moment, maybe searching for something in my face. But I kept my mask intact. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "Dinner with some investors. Might run late again." I smiled. "Of course. Don't worry about me." He nodded, relieved by my calm. He had no idea that calm was just the eye of a storm. After he fell asleep, I walked quietly to the garage. The moonlight spilled through the small window, silver and cold. I opened the drawer, took out the glue, and held it under the light. My hands didn't tremble this time. I placed it gently on the counter, beside a box identical to the one I'd found in the car earlier that day, a new one I'd bought just hours ago. I looked at them both. Two small objects that now represented the before and after of my marriage. And right there, between fear and fury, I decided exactly what I would do. Tomorrow, the truth would come to me. I wouldn't have to ask for it. He would deliver it himself. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, wondering when love had turned into surveillance. Wondering if he ever felt the same heaviness I did. Probably not. Men like Daniel don't feel the cracks until they're falling through them. When dawn came, I made coffee, brushed my hair, and smiled at my reflection. I looked calm again. Almost happy. But inside, something was shifting, a quiet resolve hardening into action. As he left for work, I kissed his cheek. He smiled, said, "Wish me luck tonight." I did. But silently, I wished for something else entirely. Because by tonight, he'd have to face the consequences of his own performance. And I'd finally see who he really was when the act ended. The next day unfolded with the strange stillness that comes when you already know something life-changing is about to happen. Even the air felt thicker. I moved through the house like I was underwater, slow, deliberate, half aware of everything. My thoughts kept circling the plan I'd built in the dark the night before. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that Daniel's mask would crack all on its own. He left early again, dressed sharp, humming under his breath like a man with nothing to hide. He kissed me goodbye, his lips brushing my forehead. I held that moment a second longer, wondering if he noticed that my body didn't lean into him anymore. He didn't. When the door closed, the house sighed in relief. I took a long breath and went straight to the garage. The morning light spilled across the counter where I'd left the two small tubes side by side. One innocent, one not. They looked identical. That was the point. I worked slowly, my hands steady now. There was no shaking, no guilt. Just the strange calm of someone who's already crossed the line. I swapped the labels carefully, wiping away the faint residue from my fingers. It was a tiny gesture, almost laughable. A child's trick, really. But sometimes truth doesn't need violence, it just needs a stage. When I was done, I placed the altered tube inside a paper bag, tucked it into my coat pocket, and sat for a moment staring at the dust motes spinning in the sunlight. I whispered to no one, "Let the truth find me." Then I smiled, a tired, broken kind of smile, and went back inside. The day dragged. I cleaned the kitchen even though it was already spotless. I rearranged books that didn't need rearranging. Every hour crawled. My mind played scenes I wasn't ready to see, him laughing with someone else, touching her the way he used to touch me, saying the same practiced lines he'd said to me in the beginning. At one point I sat at the piano, hoping music might distract me. I started playing the same soft melody I'd taught my students 100 times. But halfway through, my fingers froze. I realized I was crying without even knowing when it started. Tears slid down my face and onto the keys, tiny dark circles blooming where they fell. I wiped them away, but the sound of my own sob caught me off guard, like hearing a stranger in my house. When the clock struck noon, I forced myself to eat something. A sandwich, a bit of fruit, just enough to keep from shaking. Then I sat by the window, watching the street. It was a bright day, too bright for the heaviness I felt inside. Neighbors walked their dogs, a delivery truck stopped across the road, a group of kids passed by laughing. Life kept moving, utterly unaware that mine was about to tilt. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take the waiting anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out to the car. The metal was warm from the sun. When I opened the glove compartment, everything looked just as I'd left it. The maps, the registration papers, the small black notebook Daniel used for mileage. And the empty space where I'd found that tube yesterday. I replaced it with the altered one. Closed the compartment gently. Stared at the reflection of my face in the windshield. Pale, steady, unfamiliar. I whispered, "There. Now we'll see." I walked back inside, feeling lighter and sicker all at once. What I'd done was harmless in the physical sense, but symbolically, it felt like cutting a thread. The kind of thread that holds two lives together. The rest of the afternoon passed in fragments. I took a shower, stood under the water until my skin felt raw. I dressed in soft clothes, tied my hair back, tried to read a book but couldn't remember a single sentence. Every sound of the clock made me glance toward the door. Around 6, he texted again. "Dinner tonight with the new clients. Might be late." The same message, the same lie. I typed back, "Of course. Hope it goes well." For the first time, I added a little heart emoji. It felt like bait. He replied instantly, "You're the best. Love you." I stared at those words for a long time. I used to feel warmth when I read them. Now they just felt like punctuation on a story that was already ending. As the sun went down, I set the table for one. Lit a single candle, not for romance, but for clarity. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, letting the flicker of the flame dance on the glass. Outside, the street lights came on, one by one, like witnesses. I kept replaying our years together, the vacations, the birthdays, the inside jokes that used to make me laugh until I cried. It was strange to realize that all of it might have been real once and still not be enough to save us now. Love doesn't vanish in a moment. It just fades, slowly, like a photograph left in the sun. By 9, my phone buzzed again. Just finishing up. Shouldn't be too much longer. I smiled to myself. Because I knew that by the time he got home, his carefully built world would start to wobble. And I wouldn't need to say a word. I turned off the candle, washed my glass, and waited. The house was quiet again, that thick, heavy silence that had become my only companion. But this time, I wasn't afraid of it. This time, the silence was mine. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway hit me like thunder. It was late, close to midnight. The headlights swept briefly across the living room window, painting the walls in moving light before vanishing. Then came the familiar rhythm of his footsteps on the porch. I sat still, pretending to read. But every part of me was listening. My pulse, my breath, all of it waiting for the next moment to unfold. The door opened softly. Keys clinked against the bowl by the entrance. Then his voice, calm, casual, maybe even cheerful. "Hey, babe. You're still up?" I looked up and smiled, small and polite. "Yeah," I said. "Couldn't sleep." He walked over, kissed the top of my head, and smelled faintly of cologne and expensive wine. That same cologne he used to wear only on anniversaries. It made my stomach twist. "How was dinner?" I asked, my tone light, like I didn't already know. "Good," he said, loosening his tie. "Long boring. You know how it is." I nodded, my eyes drifting back to the book in my lap. "Sure," I murmured. I know exactly how it is. He didn't notice the edge in my voice. Or maybe he did and decided to ignore it. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, took a long sip, and then said, "I'm gonna shower. Be right back." I just nodded again. He turned away and walked down the hall, his shoes leaving faint impressions in the carpet, tiny ghosts of where he'd been. The moment I heard the bathroom door close, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Then, instinctively, I looked toward the garage door. Because that's where the car was. That's where my secret waited. I didn't move, though. Not yet. I wanted the night to play out naturally. Whatever was meant to happen would happen. A few minutes later, I heard the faint sound of the shower running. Then his voice, humming. Always that same tune, some old love song from the 90s he never remembered the name of. It used to make me smile. Tonight, it just made me tired. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who believed that love was a safe place, that trust was something solid. Now I knew better. Love is fragile. And trust is the glass it lives in. Once it cracks, no matter how hard you try to fix it, you'll always see the fracture. The shower stopped. A few minutes later, he emerged, towel around his neck, hair damp. He looked clean, composed, almost innocent again. And for a brief second, guilt flickered in me, quick and sharp, like lightning. But then he spoke. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." That single sentence erased the guilt. I'd heard that line before, every time he sensed I was slipping away. Every time he needed to reel me back in just enough to keep control. I forced a small laugh. "Just tired. That's all." He smiled, walked over, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His hand lingered a moment too long. Then he said, "I'll grab something from the car." Left my charger in the glove box. And there it was. The moment. The air in the room changed, thickened, as if even the walls were holding their breath. "Okay," I said softly. And I watched him walk out the door. The sound of his footsteps faded down the driveway. A few seconds later, I heard the click of the car door opening. Silence followed, a heavy, unnatural silence. Then a sharp shout. "Ah, what the?" My heart jumped. I stood quickly, my pulse hammering in my ears. From the window, I could see his silhouette in the dim garage light. He was bent over, fumbling, swearing under his breath. Then came the sound of panic, the frantic scrape of shoes, the clatter of metal. He shouted my name, voice strained, desperate. "Mara. Call someone. I can't." And that's when I knew. It had worked. Too well, maybe. I grabbed my phone and ran outside. He was half sitting, half collapsed against the car, his face pale with shock. The tube lay open on the ground, sticky residue on his hand. I gasped, forcing a mix of alarm and confusion. "What happened?" I asked, running toward him. It's stuck," he shouted. "My hand, it's..." He looked at me, eyes wild. There was fear there, yes, but something else too, a flicker of realization. He knew I knew. The neighbors' lights flicked on one by one as voices rose in confusion. Someone across the street yelled, "Everything okay over there?" Daniel, or rather, the man I used to call my husband, didn't answer. He just stared at me, breathing hard, jaw clenched. And in that long, silent moment between us, everything broke. Every lie, every excuse, every whispered apology that had once fooled me. All of it shattered like glass underfoot. I knelt down beside him, keeping my tone calm. "Don't move," I said. "I'm calling for help." I dialed the emergency number with steady fingers. "Hi, yes. My husband's had an accident in the garage. His hands, stuck. Please send someone quickly." The operator's voice was calm and professional. "Is he in immediate danger?" I looked at Daniel, his face twisted with pain, shame, and fury all at once. "No," I said softly. "Just a little stuck." When I hung up, the night felt oddly quiet again. Even the crickets had gone still. He sat there, avoiding my gaze. I could almost hear the thoughts running through his mind. How he'd explain this, what story he'd spin next, how he'd twist the truth again. But not this time. There was no covering this. No clean lie to hide the mess he'd made. Minutes later, the flashing red lights of the fire truck painted the street. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering. I stepped aside as the firefighters approached. They worked quickly, efficiently, their voices low but serious. One of them asked me what happened. I just shook my head. I don't know, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound believable. He said he needed something from the car. It took nearly 20 minutes before they freed him. By then, half the neighborhood had gathered, watching as they led him inside to wash off the glue and bandage his hand. His face burned with humiliation. And for the first time in months, I felt nothing. No pity. No rage. Just silence. After they left, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hand. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow, deliberate ticking of the old wall clock. The same clock that had watched over our happiest years. Now it only marked the seconds until one of us finally broke the silence. He looked up at me, eyes hollow. Mara, what did you do? I met his gaze. And for the first time, I didn't look away. What did you do, Daniel? He flinched. That was all the answer I needed. I stood, walked past him, and paused at the doorway. I think we both know, I said quietly. Whatever we had, it's already gone. And then I left him sitting there, the man with a glued hand and a guilty heart, while I walked into the night air, finally breathing freely again. The truth had found me. And it had set me free. The morning after the accident felt like waking up inside someone else's life. The whole neighborhood already knew. I didn't need to check my phone, the whispers found their way through the walls. I stood at the kitchen sink, watching Daniel through the window as he tried to start the lawn mower with his bandaged hand. He was pretending everything was normal, even though the evidence of what happened still lingered in every corner of the house. The faint smell of glue in the garage. The fire department's tire tracks in the driveway. The note one of the neighbors had left on our porch. Hope he's okay. What a scare last night. I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a sigh. Funny how quickly humiliation travels. You don't even have to send it. It walks itself around the block. Daniel avoided me all morning. He muttered short answers, never met my eyes. His voice had changed, lower, uncertain. The arrogance that used to fill every room had drained out of him, replaced by something I couldn't name. By noon, he finally spoke. Mara, he said, his tone tight, what really happened last night? I turned from the counter and looked at him. He was standing in the doorway, still wearing that same defensive half-smile. The one he used whenever he needed to act like he was still in control. What do you mean? I asked softly. He hesitated. The glue, the tube. It was in the glove box. You touched it, didn't you? I shrugged. Maybe I did. Why? His eyes narrowed. Because it wasn't supposed to be. He stopped himself mid-sentence, realizing what he'd almost confessed. Wasn't supposed to be what, Daniel? I asked. He rubbed his temples, exhaling hard. I don't know. Forget it. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than anything. And the way his voice cracked told me he knew it, too. We spent the rest of the day circling each other like strangers sharing the same oxygen. Every small sound, a cupboard closing, the kettle boiling, felt too loud. I tried to focus on simple tasks, folding laundry, watering the plants, rearranging the spice rack. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind unraveled. That evening, I found him sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the muted television. I sat across from him, waiting. After a long pause, he said, "Do you hate me?" The question surprised me, not because of its weight, but because it came from him. Daniel wasn't the type to ask for emotional clarity. He was the type to build walls out of silence and hide behind them. I took a breath. "I don't hate you," I said. "I just don't know who you are anymore." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. For a moment, I saw something raw in him, not guilt exactly, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from living two lives for too long. He whispered, almost to himself, "I made mistakes." I didn't respond. Because that word, mistakes, felt too small for what he'd done. Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary. Mistakes are saying something cruel and regretting it later. What Daniel did was a choice. After that, silence settled again. It wasn't angry this time, it was sad. The kind of silence that happens when there's nothing left to defend. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing beside me. Every inhale, every exhale felt like proof that he was still there, but the man I once loved wasn't. He had become a stranger I was merely cohabiting with. I thought about leaving, packing a bag, driving away before dawn, never looking back. But there was something unfinished in me. I needed to see how far his lies would stretch before they finally snapped. The next few days blurred together. Daniel tried to act normal, cooking breakfast, sending me texts from work, even bringing home flowers one evening. He placed them on the table with a forced smile. "Peace offering," he said. I looked at the bouquet, lilies, my favorite, though he hadn't bought them in years. "Beautiful," I said, my tone neutral. He nodded, relieved that I hadn't thrown them back at him. But what he didn't know was that I'd already started saving every message, every receipt, every faint trace of the other life he thought he'd hidden. Not because I wanted revenge, not anymore, but because I wanted truth. I wanted the full picture of what I'd been living in. One evening, while he showered, I went through his phone again. I knew it was wrong, but the need for answers outweighed the guilt. And there it was, a new name. C. Just a single letter. Short messages that looked harmless at first glance. "Lunch went great. Next time, your treat." Can't stop thinking about that night. I felt my heart sink, not with shock this time, but with resignation. It wasn't about who she was anymore. It was about the pattern. The repetition of betrayal. When I heard the water stop, I locked the phone, placed it back exactly where it was, and sat on the edge of the bed. I felt calm, disturbingly calm. Like someone who's already accepted the ending before the final page. He came out, towel around his neck, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" I looked up at him. "Yes," I said. "I'm okay." And for the first time, I meant it. Because I realized something in that moment. I didn't need to expose him. I didn't need to scream or cry or prove anything to anyone. The truth had already done the work for me. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, just like old times. He seemed almost hopeful. Maybe he thought the storm had passed. Maybe he believed that I was forgiving him. As he left for work, he leaned down and kissed my cheek. The contact felt cold, hollow. "See you tonight?" he asked. "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. But when the door closed behind him, I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. That afternoon, I began packing. Not frantically, not dramatically, quietly. One box at a time. Books. Clothes. A few photo albums I wasn't ready to throw away yet. By sunset, half the house was empty. I stood in the doorway, looking around. The echoes of our life together clung to the walls. Laughter, arguments, promises we never kept. It all felt distant now, like scenes from a movie I'd once watched too many times. Before leaving, I took one last look at the kitchen table. That's where it had all started, the silence, the suspicion, the unraveling. I placed a note there. No explanations. Just 2 words, "I know." When I closed the door behind me, the evening air felt different, crisp, alive. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd finally stopped trying to hold together something that was already broken. As I walked down the driveway, I saw the neighbors' curtains shift. They were watching, of course. Let them. Let them whisper. Because this time, I didn't care about the story they'd tell. This time, I had my own. I started the car, hands steady on the wheel, and drove away. The road stretched out before me, uncertain, wide, and beautifully empty. Somewhere in that distance was a version of myself I hadn't met yet. And for the first time, I was ready to find her. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like a deep breath after holding it for too long. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of my old house, but something lighter. This silence was mine. It didn't accuse me. It didn't hide lies behind it. It simply existed, calm and clean. I made coffee in a chipped mug I'd found in a thrift store the night before. Steam rose in slow spirals, carrying with it the smell of new beginnings. I leaned on the balcony, barefoot, watching the sunrise stretch across the city skyline. And for the first time in years, I didn't wonder where Daniel was. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for anyone's approval to start my day. The days that followed were simple. I found a job teaching piano again. Just a few students, enough to pay rent. The small sound of music returned to my life like an old friend. Each note I played reminded me that I was still here. Still capable of creating something beautiful after all that chaos. But healing isn't linear. Some days I felt light, others, I felt the weight of everything I'd left behind. There were nights I still reached for the other side of the bed, half expecting warmth. And when my hand found nothing but cool sheets, a strange ache filled my chest. Not love, not regret, just emptiness. About 2 weeks after I left, the messages began. The first one was short. Daniel, please, just talk to me. I didn't reply. 2 days later. Daniel, you can't just disappear like this. We need to talk. Then, more desperate. Daniel, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. Please come home. Each one stung less than the last. I'd expected anger, manipulation, maybe even blame. But this version of him, the pleading one, felt foreign. He wasn't apologizing because he understood what he'd done. He was apologizing because he'd lost control. After a week of silence from me, he started showing up. The first time, I saw his car parked outside my building. He didn't ring the bell, didn't knock, just sat there for an hour, engine running. I watched from behind the curtain, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to march down there and tell him to leave. But another part of me, the quieter, wiser part, whispered, let him see what absence feels like. That night, he texted again. Daniel, I saw your lights on. I know you're there. Please, Mara. I can't sleep. I can't think. I just need to explain. But explanations were what had trapped me for years. I didn't need another one. I needed peace. I turned off my phone and went to bed. For the first time since leaving, I slept soundly. A few days later, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter, handwritten, shaky, uneven. His handwriting used to be confident, almost arrogant. Now it looked like someone drowning, reaching for words as if they could save him. He wrote about how much he missed me. How the house felt like a grave without me in it. How he couldn't stop thinking about that night. The glue, the neighbors, the humiliation. He said it broke something inside him. And in a twisted way, I believed him. But what he didn't understand was that it broke something inside me long before that night ever happened. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it away in a drawer. Not to keep, but to remind myself that closure isn't always clean. Sometimes it's just knowing that the words have finally stopped meaning anything. Weeks passed. I learned to fill my evenings with small rituals. Cooking for one. Reading on the couch until I fell asleep. Taking long walks at sunset with no destination in mind. Each step felt like reclaiming another piece of myself that I'd lost in that marriage. Then, one Sunday morning, I heard a knock at the door. 3 soft taps. My heart stopped. I knew that knock. I froze. Part of me wanted to stay still, pretend I wasn't home. But curiosity, or maybe courage, made me open it. There he was. Daniel. Standing in the hallway, thinner than before, eyes sunken but alert. He held no flowers, no gifts. Just a look that said he was running out of ways to make me listen. Mara, he said, voice quiet. Please. I just want 5 minutes. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in, looking around the small apartment. It was nothing like our house, no polished floors, no designer furniture. But it was mine. Every object in that room carried my fingerprint. This is different, he said, almost to himself. I nodded. That's the point. He sat down, rubbing his injured hand. The skin had healed, but faint scars remained, pale reminders of the night everything changed. I know you don't owe me anything, he began, but I need you to understand, I never meant for things to get that far. I stayed silent. He took that as permission to continue. I was lonely, he said. Work got stressful, we stopped talking, and then, someone else just. Stop, I interrupted. The word came out sharper than I expected. Don't you dare make loneliness your excuse. We were both lonely, Daniel. But only one of us chose betrayal to fill the silence. He flinched. For the first time, he looked small. The confident man who once owned every room now seemed like a shadow of himself. I know, he whispered. I ruined it. I ruined us. I looked at him for a long moment. Then said, no, Daniel. You ruined yourself. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. Tears welled in his eyes. Maybe they were real, maybe not. I didn't care anymore. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about setting him free, it was about setting myself free from the weight of his mistakes. He stood slowly, wiping his face. I don't expect you to come back, he said. I just wanted to see you one last time. Something in his voice felt final, like a door closing gently instead of slamming. I nodded. Goodbye, Daniel. He hesitated, as if waiting for me to stop him. When I didn't, he nodded back and walked to the door. Just before stepping out, he turned slightly. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said softly. I smiled, not out of pity, but out of peace. I already have, I said. When the door closed, I stood there for a moment, listening to the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. Then I exhaled. A long, trembling exhale that felt like the last breath of a storm. I walked to the balcony, the same spot where I'd started this new chapter weeks ago. The city stretched beneath me, alive and humming. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, stillness. The kind that comes when you finally stop chasing closure and start living your own story. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the old messages one last time, and deleted them all. Every photo. Every text. Every trace of him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was simply release. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft gold. I whispered into the morning air. Thank you for the lesson. And then, quietly, I forgive you, but I'm never coming back.